Hello and welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk a little bit about assumptions. These can be one of the things that students find the trickiest to get their heads around. Not used to talking about assumptions. It's not a word they're overly familiar with using. We're going to try our best to try and clear it up and how they work within this internal. So what is an assumption? We'll start with a super simple definition. So this is just things you say are true without knowing for sure that they are. So you're going to essentially state some facts about how your simulation is going to run, some of the rules that it'll follow, and you don't necessarily know that that's true in real life, that would play out that way. But we need to make these assumptions in order to run our simulation. It's virtually impossible to create a simulation that doesn't make assumptions, and it's just how big an impact these assumptions have on how confident we should be in our findings, whether they're unreasonable assumptions or whether they're quite reasonable assumptions, and it shouldn't have a big impact on how we feel or how confident we are in our findings. So there are two main types of assumption that we're going to look at today. So the first one is one about probabilities. You'll always be given a probability in your assessment. It'll be there. So there'll be some probability of certain events happening. They're given to you. Now, are they reasonable probabilities? That's something for you to decide. But you're assuming that they're true. We'll talk a bit more about that in a second. The other type of assumption is that in a situation will be described to you, and it's your job to work out whether that situation is how it would play out in the real world, and the assumptions that you've made about how that would play out. And we'll go into a bit more detail in the following slides. So here we go, assumptions about probabilities. So you'll definitely be given some probabilities, and assuming that they're correct even to begin with, would they remain constant throughout the trial? What if you went to a different place and would the probabilities be the same? So let's say you're collecting things from a supermarket chain. At every single supermarket chain you go to, the one in Petone or the one in Wainuiomata, are they exactly the same? Is that always how it's going to be? And will the probabilities be exactly the same at the beginning of the trial as they are at the end? You just have to decide on whether these are reasonable assumptions to make and what some issues might be with them. But stating that you're assuming the probabilities remain the same throughout the trial is something you almost certainly need to write. So again, just relate that to the real world. How will they play out? Now, assumptions about situations. This is a slightly more complicated, but not too big a thing. You're going to be given the situation, as I've stated, and you might be given the number of attempts per trial. So they might say, oh, you go to a place every day for a week. So that's either, depending on whether you're talking about a working week or a full week, you're going to go for every day for 7 days or for 5 days. Is that how it would actually happen? Would you go every single day for 5 days? Is there a chance that you would go more often over a week? Let's say it's to a supermarket. Potentially you end up going more than 7 times because you forgot something one day, so you had to go twice in one day. I don't know. So just think about how it is in the real world, and see if your assumption is reasonable. You can still make the assumption and carry out your simulation. That's fine. Just either before you start or afterwards, acknowledging that there is something you're assuming is a good way to get a merit or excellence. Remembering that you need to get either one assumption for merit or at least two for excellence. Okay, another type is, do you stop at some point in the trial, and is this reasonable? So if you're collecting some things and you're going to win a prize, maybe you've got the situation set up where you can go 20 times, but you won it in the first 4 times. Do you just stop? Do you have an opportunity to win more? Is it reasonable for you to stop then? So it depends on the situation. But say it was going to a dairy and you collect these tokens and you get a free chocolate bar. Well, if you had 20 opportunities and you wouldn't necessarily just stop after if you won on the first 4, you would probably go back and see if you can win again. You'd be feeling quite lucky, right? So it's fine in your simulation to assume that you would stop once you've won, but in real life, is that how it will go? And in the situation, I also talk about how frequently you go. Well, you need to think about whether or not, if that's collecting, again, it's an easy example, many of these internals were about collecting things, is going to the shop the only way to get these tokens? Any time that you've been involved in some sort of collection or collecting prize draw, I'm sure you know that you end up with heaps of one kind and you don't have the one that you need. And you often go to your friends and you'll say, hey, I've got heaps of these, do you want to swap? So in your simulation, you'll quite likely assume the only place you can get these things from is from the outlet of whatever kind. But in the real world, that doesn't really hold up. We all swap things around. Say, oh, I need this one and you've got 3 of them and I don't have any, but I've got heaps of these one that you don't have, so you can have one of mine. And that's often how it would work in the real world. So that could have a really big impact on the probability of people winning, the fact they're able to swap. And so your simulation, you may be less confident in your results due to that assumption. Okay, so here's a little scenario. This is from a little task that I made up to do with getting ball tickets. You can pause me and have a read through so you understand properly. But essentially, feel free to stop me at any time. But essentially what you have is you're going to collect values cards from your teachers and you can go a maximum of 20 times. There's your upper limit. Is that reasonable? You're going to assume it is. That you can't go anymore. Maximum 20 times you're going to swap a values card you've got from a teacher for a chance to win one of the 5 letters relating to our 5 values. And if you get all 5, you can win a ticket to the ball. So that would be a great prize, and you've got a couple of things here. So that you've got the amount of times you're allowed to go. Is that a reasonable thing to assume that you would have a maximum of 20? Would that be enforced? Then another thing would be the probabilities. You're given these probabilities. So achievement is really, really common, right? It's 50% probability that you'll pull out an achievement one, an A. Now, maybe you're a bit slow to get your values cards, or you wait till the last minute and go, oh, I'll have a go at winning one of these free tickets. And maybe because the achievement was there, people have pulled those out, and now the achievement in the real world, the achievement letter is not 50% chance. In your simulation, you would just assume that it was 50% and it stayed that the whole way through. But if you in the real world, that might not be the case, because as people take those letters out, maybe the probabilities are not staying the same. It would depend on how the people running the competition were doing that, how they were controlling for it. So just to recap, first, to get a merit, you need at least 1 assumption, and to get an excellence, you need at least 2. And that's not all you need for excellence, but you need at least 2. You assume about probabilities or the situation, so they're assumptions you'll make. You'll be given probabilities, you'll be given a situation. You are going to assume that information is true to run your simulation. You can either in your plan talk about how reasonable it is, or after you've done your simulation, you can talk about how reasonable those assumptions were. Okay, 3, always describe how valid that assumption is, so and how it would really work in the real world. And then do the assumptions you've made, how do they affect the confidence that you have in your findings? Were they reasonable assumptions to make? Like the amount of times that you went to get whatever it was you were doing, is that a reasonable thing, or is it quite wild and out there, and actually that's not how it would play out in the real world, like people not taking into account people swapping tokens? So need to think about that and applying it to its impacts in the real world and how it would really work out. Cool. I hope that made some sense. It's often the bit that this is, as I said before, assumptions is often the thing that the students find the hardest. So good luck, and remember, better never stops.